stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisperer in Darkness. I'm your host, the Man from Leng. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, I am taking a look at Where the Gods Dwell, the 5th Mythos pack in the Dream Eater cycle. The Plateau of Leng beckons as investigators continue their search for Kadath, but the investigators are soon confronted by the Fable City's guardian, the crawling chaos himself, Nyarlathotep. There are spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the patrons of this channel for their tremendous support. The Arkham Horror LCG community is amazing, and these people have gone above and beyond to bring you content like these Mythos pack previews. Special thanks to our latest patron here at The Whisper in Darkness, Andy HOUND. Thank you very much, Andy, for your support. It is greatly appreciated. If you'd like to become a patron to support the channel's goals and see your name in lights, follow the link down below, sign up for a tier of your choice, and claim your rewards. That would be awesome. The Plateau of Leng awaits, so let's get started. Where the Gods Dwell is Scenario 4A of the Dream Quest campaign, and it takes place following the events of Scenario 3A, Dark Side of the Moon. The investigators' quest for Kadath in the Cold Wastes and the Great Ones who dwell in the Onyx City built atop the mountain brings them to my adopted homeland, the Plateau of Leng. But as the investigators attempt to breach the abode of the gods, they are confronted by the Faceless Whisperer, the Crawling Chaos, the messenger of the Outer Gods himself, Nyarlathotep. While doing research for this video, I was surprised to learn that very little is known about the Plateau of Leng. According to the Dreamland supplement for the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, it's a wind-swept tableland shunned by healthy folk. Scattered across the face of the plateau are little granite huts and villages inhabited by men from Leng like myself. Atop this plateau is a huge monastery in which lives only one being, the High Priest, not to be described. Much of the monastery is ruined, but the interior walls that still stand are decorated with paintings and frescoes depicting the history of the men from Leng. Sarkoman, the ruined capital of the men from Leng, lies at the foot of the plateau. It had 6 sphinx-crowned gates with streets leading to a vast central plaza where huge winged lions of diorite guard the top of the subterranean staircase that leads to the underworld. Moonbeasts use Sarkoman as a campsite. According to the Dreamland supplement, Kadath in the Cold Wastes is rumored to lie far to the north of the Plateau of Leng. It is surrounded by an extensive range of smaller mountains. A valley runs straight to Kadath from the Dreamlands, and the mouth of the valley is guarded by a series of mountains carved into statues. Randolph Carter was the first, and as far as I know, the only dreamer to discover the true location of Kadath. The investigators will have their work cut out for them if they hope to outwit Nyarlathotep and follow in Carter's footsteps. It's unclear from FFG's preview article how much of the plateau investigators will explore during their visit. Act 1A, Journey Through the Cold Wastes, suggests the investigators will need to visit at least a couple of locations to collect the 2 clues per investigator required to advance the Act deck. Designer Matt Newman has managed to incorporate quite a few iconic Dreamlands locations into this scenario this cycle, so I wouldn't be surprised if investigators pay a visit to Sarkoman or the monastery at some point in their travels. The mouth of the valley guarded by the statues also seems like a safe bet to be on the investigators' itinerary, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of the treacheries in this scenario focus on the cold environment that predominates the Plateau of Leng. Personally, I hope the investigators meet plenty of men from Leng during their travels. The Corsair's encounter set from the Dream Eaters features a couple of my brothers in arms. Here's hoping there are a few more in the Where the Gods Dwell encounter set. While very little is known about the Plateau of Leng, or Kadath for that matter, the same cannot be said of Nyarlathotep, the Mythos pack's primary antagonist. As a messenger of the Outer Gods, Nyarlathotep figures prominently in many of Lovecraft's tales, as well as role-playing game supplements and FFG products. If I had to choose a favorite Mythos entity, after the men from Leng of course, it would be Nyarlathotep hands down. Whenever I play Sid Meier's Civilization, I always play as the Egyptians. My name is always Nyarlathotep, and I always name my cities after Dreamland's locations. There is something about a godlike entity who can be anyone, anywhere, conquering the world that really appeals to me. Investigators will face Nyarlathotep in all his glory in Where the Gods Dwell. Designer Matt Newman has come up with a truly devilish way of representing the many masks of Nyarlathotep. There's not one, not two, but at least 5 versions of Nyarlathotep in this Mythos pack. While their fight, health, evade, damage, and horror values vary, each has the peril and hidden keyword. When you draw Nyarlathotep from the encounter deck, you secretly add it to your hand. If you so much as speak of these cards while they are in your hand, your investigator is immediately driven insane. That's it, your campaign is over, just like that. And you thought saying Hastur during the Path to Carcosa campaign was a bad idea. Nyarlathotep will simply one-shot you. And I just have to say that I am bound to screw this up when I play this scenario on Octagon. It's almost inevitable that I will say Nyarlathotep, so I'll probably have to give myself maybe 3 Nyarlathoteps per playthrough just to make sure I can get through. To make matters worse, there is a treachery in the encounter deck, Myriad Forms, which forces you to reveal all copies of Nyarlathotep in your hand, at which point they attack you before being shuffled back into the encounter deck so you can draw them again. Judging by the Nyarlathotep card in the preview, as well as the other versions of Nyarlathotep pictured in the card fan, the Ancient One doesn't hit all that hard, so pulling Myriad of Forms may not be as bad as it sounds at first. We won't know the full extent of the danger that Nyarlathotep poses until we know how many copies of the Ancient One and Myriad Forms are lurking in the encounter deck. If you secretly add Nyarlathotep to your hand every time you draw it from the encounter deck, the question then becomes, how does Nyarlathotep enter play so investigators may confront and hopefully defeat it? While the preview article is purposely vague on how Nyarlathotep enters play, the text on some of the cards in the preview suggests that it's got to happen at some point during the scenario. Nyarlathotep the Crawling Chaos, for example, has the Hunter keyword. There's not much point in it having the Hunter keyword if it never enters play. There is another clue on Myriad Forms. If Nyarlathotep is in play when you draw Myriad Forms, it moves and attacks as if it were the enemy phase. Potentially, Myriad Forms could trigger multiple copies of Nyarlathotep, which could lead to multiple attacks. Pull multiple copies of Myriad Forms during a Mythos phase in multiplayer, and you could be in for a very bad day. I don't know what Matt Newman has up his sleeve, but there are plenty of ways Nyarlathotep could enter play during this scenario. Newman recently appeared on the Great Old Ones Gaming podcast, where he hinted that much of the scenario revolves around figuring out how to confront and defeat Nyarlathotep. Personally, I'm betting that 1 or more copies of Nyarlathotep are added to the encounter deck at the beginning of the scenario, and they lose the peril and hidden keywords once the investigators have achieved various objectives and advanced the act deck. If the act deck instructs investigators to ignore the peril and hidden keywords, then Nyarlathotep would spawn normally when drawn from the encounter deck. Unfortunately, we won't know what we need to do until we get our hands on this scenario in a few months. Nyarlathotep is going to make blind playthroughs very interesting indeed. FFG spoils 3 player cards in the preview article: Summoned Hound, Unbound Beast, and Nothing Left to Lose. Let's take a look at those now. Summoned Hound is a 3-cost mystic asset that costs 1 experience point. It has intellect and combat skill icons and the ally and summon traits. As an additional cost to play Summoned Hound, you must search your bonded cards for 1 copy of Unbound Beast and shuffle it into your deck. As a free triggered ability during your turn, except during an action, you may exhaust Summoned Hound to fight or investigate with a base combat skill value of 5 or a base intellect skill value of 5, respectively. Summoned Hound has 3 health, and it takes up an ally and arcane slot. Unbound Beast is an enemy weakness with 3 fight, 3 health, and 3 evade. It has the monster, extra dimensional, and Tyndalos traits. It's bonded to Summoned Hound, and its prey is the bearer. It has the Hunter and Retaliate keywords. Unbound Beast has the following revelation effect: if there is no copy of Summoned Hound in play, set Unbound Beast aside out of play. Otherwise, set an investigator's Summoned Hound aside out of play and spawn Unbound Beast engaged with the same investigator. Unbound Beast deals 1 damage and 1 horror. I'm going to begin this review by focusing on Summoned Hound's free triggered ability, which is nothing short of amazing. Once each turn, the investigator who controls the Hound may exhaust it to take an extra fight or investigate action with a base skill value of 5. Cards such as Ashcan Pete's Trusty Hound Duke and the Survivor event Trial by Fire have proven just how powerful setting your base skill value to 4 or 5 can be. Mystics tend to have below average combat and intellect skill values, so they could certainly use a boost in those 2 skills. Better yet, since the fight or investigate action is prompted by a free triggered ability, it doesn't trigger attacks of opportunity. That's even better than the additional action provided by allies such as Leo DeLuca. If there is an enemy at your location and you need to investigate, the Hound will let you do it anyway. Like I said, it's an extremely powerful ability. Summoned Hound also has 3 health, which is a huge boon to squishy mystics and off-class mystics. But, and this is a big but, Summoned Hound is saddled with not 1 but 2 drawbacks to rein in its amazing free triggered ability. The first drawback is that you've got to shuffle a weakness into your deck as an additional cost to play Summoned Hound. As far as weaknesses go, Unbound Beast is pretty awful if you ask me. If you draw Unbound Beast while a copy of Summoned Hound is on the table, the Hound runs off to the discard pile. That's not great considering you spent an action and 3 resources to play it in the first place. Worse, now you've got to contend with an enemy with 3 fight, 3 health, and 3 evade, which will likely take you 1 or 2 actions to defeat, depending on the damage bonuses on your weapon or spells. Setting your combat skill value to 5 with Summoned Hound would certainly come in handy about now, if the Hound wasn't trying to rip you to shreds. At least you get to set Unbound Beast aside out of play if Summoned Hound is no longer in play, which is certainly not the case with other cards bonded to weaknesses. I'm looking at you, Hungering Blade and Bloodlust. While it makes sense thematically that Summoned Hound eventually turns on its master, the cost associated with that betrayal are simply too high in my books. I hate adding any more weaknesses than necessary to my deck at the best of times, so the idea of adding a weakness that has the potential to discard an ally and force me to fight for my life is a huge strike against Summoned Hound. Summoned Hound's second drawback is that it requires an ally slot and an arcane slot. That is a huge ask for traditional spell-slinging mystics and off-class mystics. There are a lot, and I mean a lot of powerful assets competing for those 3 slots, so committing 2 of them to 1 card that will eventually turn on you is not something to be done lightly. Let's talk allies for a moment. In the Mystic class alone, you've got Alyssa Graham, Arcane Initiate, David Renfield, Diana Esperance, and Olive McBride, all of which see play in a variety of builds. Arcane Initiate, for one, has seen its stock rise considerably with the proliferation of cards with the spell trait. Other powerful options that see play in Mystic decks include Mr. Rook and Peter Sylvester. You've got to ask yourself whether the free, albeit temporary, fight and investigate actions provided by Summoned Hound are really more valuable than the abilities offered by those Mystic allies, considering those allies won't go feral and try to chew your face off. You've also got to ask yourself whether your Mystic Investigator actually needs to fight or investigate with combat and intellect, since most of them still prefer to fight, investigate, and evade using assets and events that leverage their above-average willpower. It doesn't make a lot of sense for traditional spell-slinging mystics to invest the time, energy, and slots in Summoned Hound when Shriveling or Rite of Seeking, coupled with an ally such as Arcane Initiate, are as good, if not better, since they dish out additional damage and discover additional clues, respectively. While Shriveling and Rite of Seeking do have drawbacks, they are nowhere near as bad as losing an ally and or your ability to fight or investigate effectively in one fell swoop. Spell-slinging mystics also lean heavily on assets with the spell trait, most of which require arcane slots, which are in short supply. Back in the core set days, there were only 2 cards that required arcane slots, Scrying and Shriveling. Today, mystics have almost 24 assets to choose from to fill those slots. Book of Shadows and Sign Magic can alleviate the pressure on arcane slots, but most of Arkham DB's highly rated deck builders tend to avoid putting those cards in their decks. If Summoned Hound doesn't make sense in traditional spell-slinging mystic builds such as Agnes, Akachi, or Marie, that begs the question, who is this card for exactly? There are a couple of mystics who might be interested. When Diana Stanley was released in the Circle Undone, there were several builds that attempted to leverage Guardian and neutral cards rather than spells to fight and investigate. I'm thinking of a deck such as Matastrophic's Diana Eldritch Knight build. Summoned Hound might be playable in something like that as long as you kept an enchanted blade handy to put down the Hound when it inevitably turned rabid. If you're really worried about pulling the Unbound Beast, you might be able to work in cards such as Scrying 0 from the core set or Scrying 3 from the Pallid Mask to keep the Unbound Beast at bay. Scrying 0 isn't great since it costs you an action, but Summoned Hound does give you a free fight or investigate action in exchange, so at least you break even. Once you upgrade to Scrying 3, which swaps the action for a free triggered ability, you can really start to leverage the Hound. You may also want to consider using Quantum Flux to shuffle your discard pile back into your draw deck to prevent the Unbound Beast from ruining your day. We haven't seen a Mystic Investigator who really leans into the scrying mechanic yet. Perhaps we'll see one down the road, such as Gloria Goldberg, who could exploit deck manipulation to keep the Summoned Hound on a short leash. As for other Mystics, Jim Culver might be able to do something with Summoned Hound. Jim's deck building options let him include 5 level 0 cards from any other class, so he doesn't necessarily need to lean on spells to fight or investigate. Most of the Jim decks I've seen lately run all of McBride to help him pull skulls. Including Summoned Hound isn't that far-fetched, but you might end up running counter to what Jim does best. That is Chaos Bag manipulation, so that's something to keep in mind. Summoned Hound might also find a home in Father Mateo. Mateo's deck-building options let him pick up 2 copies of Summoned Hound right away, and he could pull the same scrying trick to keep Unbound Beast at bay for as long as possible. Unfortunately, Mateo has some of the most restrictive deck-building options in the game, which sort of force him to default to Mystic spells to get the job done. Summoned Hound lets you fight and investigate with a base skill value of 5, but only once each turn. The rest of the time, Mateo would probably need his spells, which don't synergize that well with the Hound, considering you're giving up that precious Arcane slot. There are 6 off-class Mystics who could play Summoned Hound, but I suspect few of them are interested in a new pet. Carolyn Fern and Peter Sylvester are BFFs, so I doubt she'd be interested in adopting a stray dog. Daisy Walker already has an intellect of 5 and doesn't fight all that much, at least not with combat, so I can't really see her taking the Hound. Playing Summoned Hound in Patrice Hathaway is a terrible idea, considering how quickly she draws through her deck. Safina Rousseau's combat and intellect are both awful, but there are plenty of other allies courting her, so the Hound will face some stiff competition. That leaves Lola Hayes and Norman Withers. There is probably a Summoned Hound build in Lola. Lola has a larger deck size, which mitigates the addition of an extra weakness to her deck. She can also play all the deck manipulation to avoid Unbound Beast. However, she's got to be a Mystic on her turn to use Summoned Hound's free triggered ability, which limits her flexibility somewhat. If Crisis of Identity happens to discard Summoned Hound, at least she's not hurt too badly if she draws Unbound Beast. Norman Withers might like Summoned Hound too. While he's already got 5 intellect, a free investigate action each turn doesn't hurt, and he could certainly use the help in the combat department. Norman's deck building restrictions really limit the number of level 0 Mystic spells that he can put in his deck, so there's slightly less pressure on his Arcane slots than other investigators. Besides, Norman already has 1 Vengeful Hound on his trail. Why not 2? Summoned Hound is a card with an amazing ability and a boatload of drawbacks. Shuffling a weakness into your deck is a terrible idea, generally speaking, and most Mystics will be very reluctant to give up an ally and an Arcane slot to play the Hound. The trick is to milk the Hound for as many free fight and investigate actions as you can before it betrays you. Deck manipulation could go a long way to mitigating the impact of Unbound Beast, but that means you're playing a bunch of cards to make another card good, which is usually a trap. Playing Summoned Hound in a Mystic deck seems like a bad idea at the moment, since most Mystics still love their spells and their assets. Perhaps Summoned Hound is just waiting for the right master. We'll see. The third card spoiled in the preview article is Nothing Left to Lose. It's a free Survivor event that costs 3 experience points. It has a wild skill icon and the spirit trait. It has the game text. If you have fewer than 5 resources, gain resources until you have 5 resources. If you have fewer than 5 cards in your hand, draw cards until you have 5 cards in your hand. Remove Nothing Left to Lose from the game. This card is absolutely bonkers. The first time I read it, I thought, gaining up to 5 resources or drawing up to 5 cards seems pretty good. Then someone pointed out to me that there is no or on this card. When you play Nothing Left to Lose, you gain up to 5 resources and draw up to 5 cards. For free! Man, oh man, that's great. Seekers and Rogues, eat your heart out. All you need to do to abuse this card is play a Survivor deck that survives on as few cards and resources as possible. But isn't that what most Survivor decks do anyway? It's certainly the case with the Ashcan Pete build that I've been playing that chugs along quite happily as long as Pete and Duke have a card and a resource to their name. Taking 1 action to restock my hand and resource pool for a late game push seems almost too good to be true. Sure, you've got to remove Nothing Left to Lose from the game, but that's not much of a drawback when you can purchase 2 copies for 6 experience points. That is an incredible bargain. Nothing Left to Lose doesn't even have the exile keyword, which seems to have fallen off the designer's radar of late. Honestly, I'm a little surprised Nothing Left to Lose isn't fast too, because, hell, why not? It already seems a little too good, might as well go for broke. At least it costs 3 experience points, which will keep it out of the hands of off-class survivors such as Tommy Muldoon, Minte Fan, and Agnes Baker. There are 16 survivor cards that cost 3 experience points. There are a few standouts, notably Scrapper and Will to Survive, but for the most part, a lot of them seem like cards that are either corner case or cards that you need to build around to really leverage their abilities. That is certainly not the case with Nothing Left to Lose. Pretty much every deck I can think of would benefit from purchasing 1, if not 2 copies of this card. Every deck needs to draw cards and gain resources, even the ones that try to run on as few of each as possible. Nothing Left to Lose lets you do both for free for a single action. Better yet, it rewards you for doing what comes naturally to most survivors anyway. Mark my words that skilled players will find ways to abuse this card. As for the rest of us, we'll likely play it for less than 5 cards and 5 resources, but depending on how many you get, that's still pretty amazing, all things considered. That's going to do it for my look at Where the Gods Dwell, the Plateau of Leng, Nyarlathotep, an amazing player card. This pack checks all the boxes. We visited the Plateau of Leng briefly during past scenarios. This time we're going to have a chance to explore it in greater detail, which is very exciting for a man from Leng like myself. Nyarlathotep is one of my favorite ancient ones, so I'm looking forward to seeing how the Peril and Hidden mechanic work with this enemy. I'll have to keep my mouth shut when I play this pack on Octagon for sure, lest I accidentally drive myself insane. The player cards spoiled in the preview article are a bit of a mixed bag. Summoned Hound doesn't make a very good first impression, but there are a few investigators who might be able to bring it to heel with the proper tools. Nothing Left to Lose, on the other hand, is just plain good. I've never been all that impressed by the survivor options at 3 experience points, and Nothing Left to Lose immediately leaps into the top 5, if not the top 3 for sure. That's going to do it for this preview. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Remember to head over to Patreon to sign up to become a patron of the channel and claim your rewards. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromleng@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromleng. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.